Okay, welcome to Friendly Fire, the Star Ledger's weekly dialogue with New Jersey's two premier political consultants, Julie Roginsky, a Democrat, and Mike DuHaime, a Republican, who have been friends for many years, which is why we call it Friendly Fire, a civil discussion. So let's start with the election results in New Jersey. It looks like one House is going to flip Republican, one House member, so that'll make it 9-3 in New Jersey. And that's in the 7th district where State Senator Tom K. Jr. is ahead comfortably of Representative Tom Malinowski, the Democrat. My question is this. As you guys know, Democrats recently redistricted after the 2020 census here, and they put a lot more red votes into Malinowski's district as an attempt to protect other incumbents, Mikey Sherrill, Josh Gottheimer, and Andy Kim. So it looks like they threw Malinowski overboard for no good reason when you look at these results. Sherrill won by 17, Gottheimer by 9, and Kim by 11. So did they blow this one?
Well, first and foremost, the reason they won by such huge margins, you might argue, is because they took some of the Democratic parts of Malinowski's district and were able to align them to make more Democratic districts for Sherrill, Kim, and Gottheimer. But I would say that, yeah, I think there probably would have been a scenario where if you had kept the previous district lines, that Malinowski could have pulled it out this year. And he's the victim of a bad map. But it's not a map that's bad enough that Tom Kane should rest easy, because it's still a district that I think is still a swing district. And ultimately, next year, in 2 years, if the Republicans move way to the right, as I expect they will, because they will not understand the mandate that they did not get this election cycle, it's going to be very tough for Tom Kane to hold on to the seat in a presidential year if Republicans overplay their hand.
What do you think, Mike?
Well, I actually think it's bad for the state in terms of what happened, because we had anywhere between 4 to 6 competitive seats in the past. It looks like we're down to one, because not only did they bolster those 3 Democratic seats, they also made the Republican seats in South Jersey more Republican. That deep South Jersey district had been, at least on paper, a 50-50 district for a long time. And you had 4 seats that swung in the last map, and now you only have 1. So I do think, it's not great for the state to have fewer competitive districts. That's going the same way as the country, where there are fewer competitive districts. In this race, I think the writing was on the wall when redistricting happened. Tom Kane's a strong candidate. Part of the reason that they threw Malinowski under the bus and strengthened Sherrill, Gottheimer, and Kim, where Sherrill, Gottheimer, and Kim proved to be stronger candidates. They were better fundraisers. They won by more last time. They didn't have any of the kind of investigation stuff going on around that. So, I think it was done this way for 2 reasons. One, they were stronger than Malinowski, and his opponent was stronger. So I think the writing was on the wall when it was a close race last time. We just knew that the redistricting was going to do this. And then Tom ran a strong race, did a good job, did what he needed to do to win.
Interesting. It's like gerrymandering for incumbents, not for Democrats or Republicans in New Jersey.
Exactly right. And historically, that's happened in New Jersey. Unfortunately, the last map had many more competitive seats than this one or the previous one.
Okay, let's move to national picture. Ron DeSantis in Florida killed by 20, a state that Trump won 2 years ago by only 5. I'm wondering, and several Trump candidates lost or were struggling as we speak now, including Oz in Pennsylvania, Herschel Walker in Georgia, a few others. So does this change the balance of power in the Republican Party on the competition for the nomination?
Well, it certainly is very good for Ron DeSantis, because the last 3 governor's races in Florida were all decided by 1 point. So even as Florida was getting a little bit redder in recent times, governor's races were very close. So going from winning by 1 to winning by 20 is a big deal. As we know, last year in New Jersey, Phil Murphy went from winning by 15 to winning by 3. It changes your strength as an incumbent. It certainly changes the strength you have in a second term. And it changes what people nationally think about you, especially against the backdrop of what was a fairly lackluster night for Republicans. I think what DeSantis did during COVID, he was kind of Trumpy, but during COVID carved his own image. He became his own man during COVID, and I think voters respected that. As I said, the state is getting redder anyway, so I think that was a strong night for him, especially among Hispanic voters, and that's something that I think Democrats and Republicans are going to look at. Republicans always win Cuban voters in Florida, which is a large percentage of the Hispanic population, but he also won Puerto Ricans and other Hispanics that Republicans don't normally win. So that's really something that Republicans are going to look at, again, especially against lackluster performances by Oz and others.
What do you think, Julie?
I think Mike is right. And I think Democrats and Republicans will have to take a very close look at Florida. Something is going on in Florida that's not analogous to the other 49 states. And I can't tell, and I don't think we have the data yet to see whether that's on the back and the strength of Ron DeSantis and his personality, because he does have a very strong personality, or whether there's something else going on in the state that is a harbinger of things to come for other states. And that's, again, something that data will show and bear out in the next week or month. And we'll have to take a very serious look at that. What happened with Hispanics in Florida doesn't seem to be replicated to that extent nationally, but I will say, we saw this in 20 as well, Democrats are starting to lose the Hispanic vote in ways that is troubling for the Democratic Party and something that they need to look at. I also want to caution that there is, as Mike pointed out, no such thing as a monolith Hispanic vote. And every time you talk to Latino voters, they remind you of that constantly. Cubans are not Dominicans, are not Guatemalans, are not Puerto Ricans, and so on, and Mexicans. And I think both parties at their own peril think of Latino or Hispanic voters just as a monolith that they have to try to manipulate one way or the other.
Gotcha. Let's ask, I want to ask you about abortion as well. You saw the Kentucky vote, I'm sure, where a constitutional amendment to ban abortion was defeated. And 3 other states, pro-choice states, where they enshrined the right to abortion in their constitutions. There is a real division of opinion, and I know, Julie, you've been skeptical about the importance of abortion in this election, but some are looking at these results and saying that really was significant. Some polls showed the second issue behind inflation. So I don't know which one of you wants to start with this one, but how did abortion play?
Well, I'll say this about abortion. When abortion itself is on the ballot, as it was in Kansas earlier this year, as it was in Kentucky, as it was in Michigan, this is a pro-choice country. It just is. And when abortion is on the ballot, up or down, people tend to vote to support abortion rights. I will also go further and say that if you ask voters their views on the right to choose and how important it is to them, they will say it's very important to them. What I'm skeptical about and have continued to be skeptical about is whether abortion is a motivating factor to get people to the polls when it comes to just getting them to vote for specific candidates. I keep saying things that poll well don't necessarily get people to the polls. And I think abortion was part and parcel of this sense among a lot of voters, and it turns out not just primary Democratic voters, but among a lot of voters, that the Republican Party has really overreached. It overreached on January 6th, it overreached on its enabling of Trump, it overreached on abortion, it overreached on the threat to democracy, and so on and so forth. And abortion was part and parcel of that concern. And that concern was so huge that it trumped, no pun intended, concerns that voters might have had about economy under Joe Biden. But abortion in and of itself, I don't think is the reason that Democrats did as well as they did last night.
What's your take, Mike?
I think abortion certainly energized Democrats, and in a year where it was trending all Republican for a long time, the Dobbs decision, I think, gave Democrats some motivation that they didn't have before. Then Joe Biden had a few legislative successes as well that were not related there that I think gave them some momentum. But I think Julie's spot on this. When it is on the ballot, it is different than being one of a myriad of things that voters look at. For example, you mentioned Kentucky. They voted, if you will, pro-choice on that amendment, but Rand Paul very easily wins re-election to the United States Senate, or the Republican United States Senator there, right? So people who are voting, if you will, pro-choice are still voting Republican for the United States Senate. So I think that's what you're seeing. What you hear from Julie is that it is an issue of importance. But as a standalone, you see one thing, and when it's just with the list of other issues, it's not going to dominate the way that some people did. But don't get me wrong, I think it did help Democrats this year. Ultimately, candidates matter, and how the candidates play those things matter kind of more than anything.